Revenge with Kimi, where love, betrayal, justice ignite unforgettable stories. We uncover complex relationships, intense family drama, gripping Reddit tales, and satisfying revenge, revealing humanity's dark heart. You guys, I have to tell you about the Thanksgiving that changed my life. It was supposed to be just another agonizing dinner with my husband, Mark's family, where he'd inevitably tear me down. But this time, after he mocked my perfect pecan pie, the pie I'd slaved over for hours, my 10-year-old son, Ethan, spoke 5 simple words that shattered everything. Mark's confident smirk vanished like smoke. And in that instant, I knew my son had just handed me the key to a truth I'd been too afraid to face. Sometimes the smallest voices reveal the biggest, most painful lies. The November air was sharp that year, the kind that made you feel like something urgent was brewing. I was Claire, 35, and moving through my kitchen with what looked like effortless grace. But trust me, it was anything but. My auburn hair was neatly pulled back, my violet-patterned apron already dusted with flour. Today mattered. It was the annual post-Thanksgiving dessert gathering with Mark's family, a tradition I dreaded but also felt compelled to perfect. The clock on the microwave read 3:30. They'd be here by 6, and my famous pecan pie was cooling on the marble counter, its amber glaze catching the afternoon light just right. It was my mother's recipe, passed down through generations of Southern women who knew their way around a kitchen. I'd made it countless times, but today, every pecan was arranged in perfect concentric circles, the filling set just so. "Mom, you've checked that pie like 10 times already," Ethan said, leaning against the doorway. He had Mark's dark hair, but my green eyes, and in them a mixture of amusement and concern that was far too mature for a 10-year-old. I smiled, the genuine warmth I felt for him temporarily pushing away my anxiety. "Just making sure it's perfect, sweetheart. You know how your Grandma Janet likes to notice every little detail." He peered at the pie. "It looks amazing. Way better than the store-bought stuff Grandma brings sometimes and pretends she made." I tried to sound stern but couldn't hide my smile. "Ethan, we don't say things like that, even if they're true." But there was something in his voice, a knowingness that made me pause. He was noticing things, picking up on the subtle currents that ran through our family gatherings like invisible tripwires. Before I could ask him about it, Mark's BMW pulled into the garage, the slam of the car door harder than necessary. He'd had a difficult day. My shoulders tensed automatically, a reflex I developed over the past year as his criticisms grew sharper, more frequent. Mark walked in, his charcoal suit still impeccable. At 38, he still had that athletic build from his college lacrosse days, and his confidence filled rooms like expensive cologne, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. He set his briefcase down with a thud, his eyes scanning the kitchen. "Smells like you've been busy." Was it a compliment? An observation? These days I could never be sure. "I wanted everything to be nice for tonight," I said, keeping my voice light. "Your family always—" "My family always expects too much," Mark interrupted, pouring himself a scotch. "That's why I don't understand why you insist on trying so hard. It's just dessert, Claire, not a state dinner." The dismissiveness stung, but I'd learned to swallow these small hurts like bitter pills. 6 months ago, I might have reminded him that his mother specifically requested homemade desserts, that last year's slightly overdone tart had been the subject of pointed comments for weeks. But defending myself only led to longer arguments, and with Ethan in the house, I preferred peace. "I'll go shower," Mark said, heading upstairs. "Try not to burn anything this time." Ethan moved closer after he left. "Mom, why does Dad say stuff like that?" My hands stilled on the dish towel. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that love can curdle into something else? Something harder to define? That the man who once brought me flowers every Friday now found fault in everything? "Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're stressed," I offered, the explanation feeling hollow even to my own ears. Ethan didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. Instead, he helped me set the dining room table, carefully placing the good china, the Wedgwood wedding gift from Mark's parents, with more precision than most 10-year-olds would bother with. I was grateful for his steady presence. By 5:45, I was in the navy dress Mark bought me last Christmas, conservative, expensive, utterly forgettable. Standing out at these gatherings only invited more scrutiny. I looked exactly like what Mark's family expected, appropriate. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. Harold and Janet Morrison were never late. They stood there like matched bookends, silver-haired, expressions of mild disapproval etched on their faces. "Claire," Janet said, air-kissing my cheek without making contact. "The house looks clean." Classic Janet, a compliment wrapped in an insult, or vice versa. I'd given up decoding her years ago. Harold handed me his coat without a word, already looking past me toward the living room where Mark was setting up the bar. In Harold's world, men talked to men about important things. Women handled coats and appetizers. Sophie and Alan arrived minutes later. Sophie, Mark's younger sister, was a carbon copy of Janet, already perfecting the art of subtle condescension. "Claire!" Sophie exclaimed with false brightness. "You look rested. That must be nice, having all day to prepare for these things." The implication hung in the air that I did nothing all day, that my life as a homemaker was one long vacation. Never mind, I'd left my marketing career 2 years ago to raise Ethan, managing the household, finances, everything that kept our lives running smoothly while Mark focused on his career. "Let me take your coat," I said, instead of responding to the dig. Silence was often the best defense. As I hung the coats, I caught a snippet of conversation. Sophie's voice just low enough. "Let's see if she messes this up again." Janet's soft laugh, agreeing without words. My cheeks burned. Last year's tart hadn't even been that burnt, just slightly darker around the edges. But in the Morrison family, slightly imperfect might as well be completely ruined. I returned to find everyone seated, Mark holding court. Ethan sat quietly beside me. Under the table, his small hand squeezed mine. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered. I like your cooking best." The simple kindness nearly undid me. Dinner progressed, smoothly enough. The roasted chicken was perfect, the vegetables seasoned. Even Janet couldn't find fault. I contributed little, focusing on glasses and plates. Easier to be the silent facilitator than risk saying something that would be dissected later. Finally, dessert. I stood, smoothing my dress, and headed to the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Mark's voice, louder than necessary. This year, Claire insisted on doing it all herself. There was something in his tone that made my stomach tighten. Not pride, but a warning. A setup. I returned with the pie, setting it in the center of the table. "Oh," Janet said in that way. "How traditional." "It was my mother's recipe," I said quietly, beginning to cut and serve slices. "Well, let's hope it lives up to the family legacy," Harold said, accepting his plate like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Everyone took their first bites in relative silence. I watched Mark, saw him take that slow, deliberate bite, saw his expression shift. He set his fork down with a soft clink, and a smirk spread across his face, the same expression he wore when closing a deal that hurt someone else but benefited him. "Even the dog could do better," he said, pushing the plate away with theatrical disgust. The words hung in the air. Then Sophie's sharp, delighted laugh broke the silence. Alan snorted. Harold shook his head with exaggerated disappointment. Even Janet allowed a small, vindicated smile. The heat rose to my cheeks, burning down my neck, across my chest. I looked at my own untouched slice, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The pie was perfect. I knew it was perfect, but it didn't matter. Mark had pronounced judgment, and in this family his word was law. Beside me, Ethan's spoon clinked harder than necessary. I could feel his anger radiating off him. This 10-year-old boy, wanting to defend his mother but not knowing how. "Perhaps we should move to the living room for coffee," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Leave the pie," Mark said, still smirking. "We'll let the dog have it later. At least someone might enjoy it." More laughter rippled. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Not breaking, but a clarity, a sudden sharp focus. The perfect family image I'd worked so hard to maintain, the careful facade to keep everyone happy, to keep the peace. I could see it for what it truly was. A prison I'd built for myself, bar by bar, compromise by compromise. I stood mechanically, clearing plates, my movements automatic, my mind processing this moment, this culmination of 1,000 small cruelties. Mark was still talking, warming to his theme now that he had an appreciative audience. "You know, they offer cooking classes at the community center," he said, dripping with false concern. "Maybe that would be a good use of all that free time you have, honey. Guess you've still got a lot to learn." Sophie tittered. "Oh, Mark, you're terrible," she said, making it clear she found him delightful. "Just trying to help," Mark replied. "I mean, we can't all be naturally talented in the kitchen. Some people need more instruction." My hands trembled slightly as I stacked the dessert plates. Each word was another small cut, and Mark knew exactly where to aim them. He'd had years of practice. That's when I heard it, a sharp clink of metal against china. Everyone turned. Ethan had set his spoon down with deliberate force, the sound cutting through the cruel laughter like a blade. He sat straighter, his green eyes moving from one adult face to another. There was something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, but a kind of determined resolution, far too mature for his ears. The room fell silent, waiting. Even Mark seemed to sense a shift. His smirk faded slightly as he looked at his son. Ethan's voice, when it came, was calm and clear. "Tell them about New York." 5 words. Just 5 simple words. But they might as well have been a grenade rolled across the mahogany table. The silence that followed was different, thicker, charged with something electric and dangerous. I watched Mark's face transform in slow motion. The smirk vanished completely, his skin paling beneath his perpetual tan, his hand tightening around his wine glass until his knuckles went white. "What?" Mark's voice came out strangled, nothing like his usual confident baritone. Ethan didn't elaborate. He simply picked up his spoon again and took another bite of pie, chewing slowly, his eyes never leaving his father's face. My heart raced. I had no idea what Ethan meant, but Mark's reaction told me everything. This wasn't nothing. This was something significant enough to drain the color from my husband's face. Janet was the first to recover, her sharp voice cutting through the tension. "What's in New York, Mark?" Mark's laugh was forced hollow. "Just some work trip. You know how kids are, they get confused about." "I'm not confused," Ethan said quietly, still eating his pie with mechanical precision. Alan leaned forward, his eyes bright with the kind of interest he usually reserved for gossip about other people's failures. "What happened on that trip, big brother?" "Nothing happened," Mark said, too quickly, too defensively. "It was just a standard business trip, meetings with clients." Ethan must have overheard something and misunderstood. His eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. I'd seen Mark in dozens of high-pressure situations, but I'd never seen him look like this. "Ethan," Sophie said, her voice honeyed with false sweetness, "what exactly did you mean about New York?" Ethan set down his spoon again, gently this time. He looked at his aunt with those knowing green eyes. "Dad knows," he said simply, then turned to me. "May I be excused, Mom?" I nodded numbly, watching my son push back his chair and walk calmly from the room. The soft sound of his footsteps on the stairs seemed unnaturally loud. "Well," Harold said, his voice gruff with disapproval, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at Mark or Ethan's breach of dinner table protocol. "Kids," Mark tried again, forcing another laugh that died in his throat. "You know how they are, always picking up bits and pieces of things and creating stories." But the damage was done. The comfortable cruelty had evaporated, replaced by something uncertain and suspicious. Janet's eyes narrowed as she studied her son. I recognized the look. It was the same one she used when she suspected the housekeeper of stealing silver. Perhaps we should have that coffee now, Mark said, already standing, desperate to escape. I'll help Claire with. Sit down, Harold commanded, and Mark sank back into his chair like a chastised schoolboy. Claire can manage the coffee. She always does. I moved toward the kitchen on autopilot, my mind racing. What did Ethan know? What had he seen or heard? And more importantly, why had Mark reacted like he'd been caught? As I prepared the coffee, I could hear the strained conversation from the dining room. Sophie trying to fill the silence, Alan making jokes that fell flat, Janet's occasional sharp questions that Mark deflected with increasing desperation. When I returned with the coffee, the atmosphere was still thick with unspoken questions. Mark jumped up to help me, something he never did, taking the tray from my hands with exaggerated care. "Thank you, darling," he said loudly, performatively, his hand lingering on my arm. "You've worked so hard tonight." I wanted to pull away, but everyone was watching, so I smiled the same empty smile I'd perfected over years, letting him play the devoted husband. The rest of the evening crawled by in uncomfortable fits and starts. Harold tried to steer conversation toward safe topics, the economy, the weather, anything but New York. But it was like trying to ignore an elephant in the room. Every pause echoed with Ethan's 5 words. Finally, mercifully, Janet announced it was time to leave. "We have an early morning tomorrow," she said, though tomorrow was Sunday. The goodbyes were stilted, formal. Sophie hugged me, but whispered, "What was that about?" I could only shrug, playing ignorant, even as my mind churned. Alan clapped Mark on the shoulder, but there was something knowing in his expression. "Take care, brother," he said, and it sounded more like a warning. After they left, Mark immediately went to his office, closing the door firmly. I stood in the hallway, listening to the muffled sound of his voice. He was on the phone, speaking urgently, too quietly for me to make out the words. I climbed the stairs slowly, stopping at Ethan's room. He was in bed, but still awake, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his nightlight. "Ethan," I said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed. "What was that about? What happened in New York?" He looked up at me with those serious green eyes. "I'll tell you later, Mom. I promise. I couldn't let him keep being mean to you. Not tonight." Tears pricked at my eyes. My 10-year-old son had tried to protect me, found some weapon against his father's cruelty. I should probably scold him for speaking out of turn, for creating a scene. Instead, I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too, Mom. And Mom, your pie was perfect. Grandma's just jealous. She can't make anything that good." I smiled despite everything, tucking the blanket around him. But as I left his room, the smile faded. I needed to know what Ethan knew. I needed to understand what had made Mark look like his world was collapsing. Because if I was honest, I'd seen that look before. Glimpses of it when he came home late, when certain phone calls came through, when I asked too many questions about his business trips. I'd ignored it, rationalized it, told myself I was imagining things. But Ethan's 5 words had changed everything. The house felt different after everyone left, like the air itself was holding secrets. Mark had barricaded himself in his office. I busied myself with cleaning up, my movements mechanical, my mind elsewhere. After loading the dishwasher, I noticed Mark had left a suit jacket draped over a kitchen chair. Without really thinking, I picked it up to hang it in the closet. As I did, a receipt fluttered from the inside pocket, landing face up on the floor. The Carlisle Hotel, Manhattan, dated November 12th, just 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. My hand stilled. Mark had told me he was in Chicago that week, meeting with potential investors. I remembered because he'd missed Ethan's school play, the one where Ethan played Thomas Edison. I'd sent him a video, and he'd texted back that he was sorry to miss it, but the meetings were running late. I heard Mark's office door open and quickly shoved the receipt into my pocket, busying myself with hanging his jacket just as he appeared in the doorway. "Claire," he said, his voice imbued with that forced casualness that meant he was about to lie about what Ethan said. "It's fine." I interrupted, not ready for whatever story he was preparing. Kids say strange things sometimes. He studied my face, clearly trying to gauge what I knew. Exactly. That's what I told my parents when they called just now. Kids pick up fragments of adult conversations and create their own narratives. Your parents called. I kept my voice neutral, folding a dish towel with unnecessary precision. Mother was concerned. You know how she is. He moved closer, and I could smell the scotch on his breath. Heat had more than usual tonight. I explained that Ethan must have overheard me talking about the New York office. We're considering opening a satellite branch there. It was a good lie, smooth and plausible, the kind of lie I would have accepted without question just days ago. But the receipt in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. That makes sense, I said, meeting his eyes with practiced calm. I'll talk to Ethan tomorrow about not interrupting adult conversations. Relief washed over Mark's features. Good. Yes, we should present a united front on this. He reached out to touch my shoulder, and it took everything in me not to flinch. I'm going to shower. Long day tomorrow. I need to go into the office to prepare for Monday's presentation. On a Sunday, of course. I nodded, waiting until I heard the shower running before pulling out the receipt again. The Carlisle Hotel. I knew it by reputation. 5 stars. $800 a night minimum. Not the kind of place you stayed for standard business meetings. I climbed the stairs quietly, stopping at Ethan's door. He was still awake, sitting up in bed with a book. Can't sleep? I asked, sitting beside him. He shook his head. Is Dad mad? No, just surprised. I studied his face, wondering how to approach this. Ethan, I need you to tell me what you know about New York. He bit his lip, a gesture so young it reminded me he was still just 10. You promise you won't be mad? I promise. Ethan reached under his pillow and pulled out his tablet. I wasn't trying to spy, he said quickly, but Dad left his phone in the car when he picked me up from soccer practice last week, and it kept ringing. I looked to see if it was you or something important. He unlocked the tablet and showed me a photo he'd taken, a screenshot of Mark's phone screen showing an incoming call. The contact name was Rachel, New York. My stomach dropped. She called 3 times while Dad was talking to Coach Anderson. Ethan swiped to show another screenshot, a text preview that had popped up. Can't wait to see you again. Same hotel. He paused. When I gave Dad his phone back, he got really weird and told me never to touch his phone again. But Mom, that wasn't the first time I'd seen her name. I pulled him into a hug, as much for my own comfort as his. You did the right thing. None of this is your fault, okay? None of this is your fault. After Ethan finally fell asleep, I retreated to our bedroom, but I couldn't settle. Mark was snoring beside me, peaceful in a way that seemed almost insulting given the turmoil in my mind. I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to the computer. Their credit card statements were all online. Mark handled the finances, insisting it made sense given his expertise, but I still had the passwords. I logged in, my heart pounding, scrolling through the November statement. There it was. The Carlisle Hotel, $2,400 for a 3-night stay. But that wasn't all. Charges from Bergdorf Goodman, $1,890. Tiffany and Company, $1,200. Daniel, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, $650. All during the week, he was supposedly in Chicago eating conference rubber chicken and staying at the Marriott. I took screenshots of everything, emailing them to myself at an old email address Mark didn't know about. As I did, I noticed a pattern. Similar charges going back months. Always in New York, always during his supposed business trips, always at restaurants and shops that suggested romance, not business. The next morning was Sunday, but Mark left early as promised, kissing my cheek in a perfunctory way that made my skin crawl now that I knew what I knew. As soon as his car pulled away, I called Maya. Maya Blackwell had been my roommate in college and was now a paralegal at a law firm downtown. More importantly, She was the kind of friend who would help you bury a body and never ask questions. Claire, I was just thinking about you. How was the family dinner from hell? Maya, I need your help. My voice was steady, but Maya must have heard something in it because her tone immediately shifted. What's wrong? Are you okay? Can I come over? I need legal advice. Off the record. Of course. Jeremy's taking the kids to his mother's. Come now. An hour later, I sat in Maya's sunny kitchen, both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I wasn't drinking. The printed credit card statements were spread between us. Maya whistled low. This is comprehensive. How long do you think it's been going on? Based on the charges, at least 6 months, maybe longer. My voice sounded detached, like I was discussing someone else's life. I need to know who she is. This Rachel. Maya was already at her laptop. Rachel in New York. That's not much to go on, but if he's been this sloppy with the credit cards, he's probably been sloppy in other ways too. It took Maya less than an hour to find her. Rachel Thompson, according to LinkedIn, was a 32-year-old investment analyst at a firm that frequently partnered with Mark's company. Her profile photo showed a polished blonde with perfect teeth and the kind of competent smile that came from never having to doubt your place in the world. She started at the firm 8 months ago, Maya read. Previously worked in London. MBA from Wharton. I stared at the photo. She was everything I wasn't. Younger, professionally accomplished, probably still full of ambition and dreams that hadn't been slowly suffocated by years of small compromises. Claire, Maya said gently, closing the laptop. You need to be smart about this. Mark's not just going to roll over if you confront him. He's got resources, connections. You need documentation, evidence. You need to protect yourself and Ethan. I know, my voice was hollow. I knew things weren't perfect, but I thought we were working through it. I thought if I just tried harder, was a better wife, a better homemaker. Stop. Maya's voice was firm. This isn't about you not being enough. This is about Mark being a cheating bastard who tears you down in front of his family for sport. That evening, when Mark came home, I was ready. I'd hidden all the evidence, coached Ethan to act normal, and prepared a simple dinner that wouldn't invite criticism. How was the office? I asked, serving him a plate of pasta. Productive, he said, scrolling through his phone. Got a lot done without the usual interruptions. I watched him lying with such ease, wondering how many times he'd done it before without me noticing. That's good. Oh, I was thinking about taking Ethan to the city next weekend. Maybe see a show. Mark's head snapped up. New York? Why would you want to go there? Just thought it would be fun. We haven't been in ages. I kept my voice light, casual, but I was watching his reaction carefully. It's expensive and crowded, and Ethan has soccer practice. Soccer season ended last week. Mark's jaw tightened. I just don't think it's a good idea. If you want to take him somewhere, go to the Children's Museum here in town. The dismissal was so typical, but now I heard the undertone of panic in it. He didn't want me in New York, didn't want me anywhere near his other life. After dinner, as Mark settled in to watch television, I made my next move. I was organizing your office earlier, I said casually. You had some receipts on your desk. Should I file them with the November expenses? I watched him carefully, saw the moment of calculation in his eyes as he tried to remember what receipts might have been visible. I'll handle it, he said quickly. Those are complicated business expenses that need special categorization. Of course, I agreed, then added innocently, though I noticed one was from the Carlisle Hotel. I thought you stayed at the Marriott for the Chicago trip. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Mark's face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned annoyance. There was a client dinner in New York, he said smoothly. Last-minute thing. I had to fly there for the evening, then back to Chicago. Didn't seem worth mentioning. It was almost impressive, the speed with which he could construct a lie. but I had seen the 3-night charge. That must have been exhausting, I said sympathetically. All that flying. It's part of the job, Mark said, his attention already returning to the television, dismissing me like he always did once he thought he'd handled a situation. That night, as Mark slept beside me, I lay awake planning. I would need more evidence. I would need to be careful. But for the first time in years, I felt something other than resignation. I felt determined. The perfect family image hadn't just cracked. It had shattered, and I was done pretending otherwise. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of pie, perfect and golden, and of Ethan's calm voice, saying 5 words that changed everything. In the dream, I was the one who spoke them, clear and strong, and Mark was the one who sat silent, exposed, with nothing to say in response. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I sat in the office of Diane Hartley, the divorce attorney Maya had recommended. Diane was everything I had hoped for. Sharp, professional, and utterly unsympathetic to cheating husbands. You've done excellent work gathering evidence, Diane said, reviewing the documents I'd provided. But in this state, adultery doesn't significantly impact asset division unless you can prove dissipation of marital funds. He spent thousands on her, I pointed out. Yes, but he'll argue those were business expenses. He's in finance, client entertainment, networking events. It's hard to prove otherwise. Diane leaned back in her chair. What we need is something more concrete. A confession, ideally, or witnesses to the affair itself. I thought about Thursday about Mark's planned trip to Philadelphia. An idea began to form, one that made me feel both sick and exhilarated. What if I could get him to admit it in front of his family? Diane raised an eyebrow. That would certainly help. Witnesses to a confession, especially hostile ones, are valuable. But how would you manage that? I smiled for the first time in days. Leave that to me. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday planning, each detail carefully considered. I called Janet on Tuesday afternoon, my voice carefully calibrated to sound hesitant, uncertain. Janet, I wanted to apologize for Ethan's behavior at dinner the other night. I'm actually concerned about him. He's been saying strange things lately. Janet's voice sharpened with interest. She loved being brought into family drama, especially when it let her feel superior. What kind of strange things? Well, he keeps talking about this woman named Rachel. Says he heard Daddy talking to her. I think he might be making up stories for attention. I paused, then added, I'm worried he might say something at school. You know how people gossip. The hook was baited perfectly. Janet's greatest fear was public embarrassment, the Morrison name being dragged through the mud. We should discuss this as a family, Janet declared. Come for dinner Thursday. All of us together. We'll get to the bottom of this behavior problem. Oh, but Mark has a conference in Philadelphia on Thursday. I'll call him myself, Janet said. He can delay his trip by a few hours for something this important. I smiled to myself. Janet Morrison ordering her son to appear was something Mark couldn't refuse, conference or not. Wednesday evening, Mark was furious. I can't believe you involved my mother in this, he hissed, pacing our bedroom. I have important meetings. Your mother insisted, I said innocently. She's worried about Ethan. You know how she is about family reputation. Mark rubbed his face, clearly calculating. Fine, but we're presenting a united front. Ethan is going through a phase, maybe acting out because of school pressure. We both agree on this story. Of course, I agreed. A united front. Thursday arrived, cold and bright. I dressed carefully, not the usual conservative outfit Janet would expect, but something with a bit more confidence. A burgundy dress I'd bought years ago, but rarely wore. One that Mark had once said made me look like I was trying too hard. I was done trying to please any of them. Ethan sensed something different about me. You look nice, Mom, he said as we got in the car. Like you're going somewhere important. We are, I said, squeezing his hand. Tonight's important. Just remember, no matter what happens, I love you, and none of this is your fault." He nodded solemnly, and I saw that same determined look from Thanksgiving dinner in his eyes. My brave little boy. We arrived at the Morrison house at 6 sharp. Mark's BMW was already in the driveway. He'd come straight from work, just as I'd expected. He wouldn't have had time to cancel properly with Rachel. Wouldn't have been able to explain without raising suspicion. Inside, the family was already gathered in the formal living room. Harold looked irritated. Sophie and Alan had the eager expressions of spectators at a boxing match. Janet sat regally, ready to hold court. And Mark? Mark looked trapped, checking his phone every few seconds, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. "Let's address this directly," Janet began without preamble. "Ethan, this behavior of making up stories needs to stop." Ethan looked at his grandmother calmly. "I didn't make anything up." "Don't talk back to your grandmother." Mark snapped, his voice sharper than necessary. I put my hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Actually, I've been thinking about what Ethan said. Maybe we should hear him out." Mark's head whipped toward me. "Claire, we discussed." "I know what we discussed," I said evenly. "But I think your family deserves the truth." The room went very still. Sophie leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "What truth?" Harold demanded. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small tablet. "Ethan, why don't you show everyone what you showed me?" Mark started to stand. "This is ridiculous." "Sit down," Harold commanded, and Mark sank back into his chair. Ethan took the tablet and pulled up the screenshot. Rachel's contact with a heart emoji, the text about meeting at the same hotel. He passed it to Janet, whose face went very pale. "This proves nothing." Mark said quickly, "That could be anyone. A client." "A client with a heart emoji?" Sophie asked, her voice dripping with false concern. I pulled out the credit card statements next, laying them on the coffee table like playing cards. The Carlisle Hotel, Tiffany Bergdorf Goodman, all during your Chicago trip. Mark's face was greening. "You went through my things." "Our things," I corrected. "Our credit cards, our accounts. This is a violation of privacy. Like your affair is a violation of our marriage." The word affair hung in the air like a struck bell. Janet gasped. Harold's face darkened. Alan actually laughed a short, surprised bark. Mark's phone rang, cutting through the tension. The screen lit up with Rachel. "Answer it," I said softly. "She's probably wondering why you're late." Mark grabbed the phone, declining the call, but it immediately rang again. "Popular tonight," Alan observed. Mark was sweating now, his carefully constructed image crumbling in real time. "This is... You don't understand. It's not what it looks like." "Then explain it," Harold said, his voice like iron. "Explain why you're getting calls from someone with a heart emoji while your wife is showing us hotel receipts." The phone rang a third time. This time, in his agitation, Mark hit answer instead of decline. Rachel's voice filled the room through the speaker. He'd accidentally put it on speakerphone. "Mark, where are you? I've been waiting for an hour. The champagne's getting warm." Mark frantically hit the end button, but it was too late. Everyone had heard. Sophie covered her mouth. Janet stood up, her face a mask of fury. "In front of your son," she said, her voice shaking. "You're doing this in front of your son." "Mom, I can explain." "Don't." Janet's voice was ice. "Don't you dare try to lie to me too." I stood up, gathering my papers with steady hands. The woman's name is Rachel Thompson. She works at an investment firm. This has been going on for at least 6 months, maybe longer. I turned to Mark, meeting his eyes for the first time all evening. "I would have given you everything. I gave up my career for you. I endured your criticism, your contempt, your family's condescension. I tried so hard to be what you wanted." My voice was calm, steady, but tears were running down my cheeks. "But it was never going to be enough, was it? Because the problem wasn't me. It was you. Mark tried one more time. Claire, please. Let's discuss this at home. No. The word was firm. Final. Ethan and I are staying elsewhere tonight. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Your lawyer? Mark's voice cracked. Claire, that's not necessary. We can work this out. Harold stood up, his full height imposing even at 70. You humiliated your wife in front of this family. You insulted her cooking while you were cheating on her. You made us all complicit in your cruelty. His voice was filled with disgust. I'm ashamed to call you my son. The words hit Mark like physical blows. He looked around the room, searching for an ally but found none. Even Sophie, who had delighted in my embarrassment just days ago, looked sickened. I took Ethan's hand. We're leaving now. As we walked to the door, Janet called out, Claire. I turned, expecting one last barb, one final criticism. But Janet's eyes were soft, almost apologetic. The pie was excellent. It always has been.